My friends and I decided to escape the city and spend a couple of days in nature. We rented 2 motorhomes and set off, excited about the break. My wife, Emily, and I were in one motorhome, while Bob and his wife, Roxanne, were in the other. We packed everything we needed for a perfect getaway: meat for a barbecue, plenty of drinks, and all our camping gear. The drive was filled with laughter and anticipation as we headed toward our destination, a secluded spot known for its beauty. The place where we planned to stay was like something out of a postcard. A serene river meandered through a dense forest, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. Most importantly, it was far removed from the hustle and bustle of city life. As we set up camp, the sky began to darken with ominous clouds. We quickly started grilling the meat, hoping to beat the impending rain. Sitting on a meadow near the lake, we enjoyed our meal in the peaceful surroundings. There was a sense of contentment as we shared drinks, laughter, and plans for our mini vacation. But nature had other plans. Without warning, the sky opened up, unleashing the torrential downpour. The rain fell in sheets, instantly soaking us. We grabbed our belongings and ran back to the motorhomes, our laughter turning into shouts over the deafening roar of the rain. The rain continued unabated, transforming the serene landscape into a soggy, foreboding place. Evening was approaching, and the relentless drumming on the roof of the motorhome became an oppressive soundtrack to the gathering darkness. I sat at a window staring out at the forest, which now seemed to be cloaked in an eerie, unsettling mist. Despite the rain, the forest held a haunting beauty that I couldn't tear my eyes away from. Emily was absorbed in her book, seemingly unbothered by the storm outside. The interior of the motorhome was cozy, but the persistent rain and the encroaching night began to wear on my nerves. Suddenly, my gaze was drawn to a figure standing by a tree, barely visible through the downpour. It looked like a person, but who would be standing in the forest in such weather? I strained to see clearly, but the figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the light or my overactive imagination. That night, sleep eluded me. The constant drumming of rain on the roof was a relentless reminder of the storm outside. But through the rhythmic patter, I began to hear something else: footsteps. Someone was walking around our motorhome. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat formed on my forehead. Fear gripped me, and I listened intently. Then, the sound that made my blood run cold, a harsh, grating noise, as if someone was scratching the body of the motorhome with a sharp metal object. The noise continued, relentless and terrifying, before stopping abruptly. Only the sound of the rain remained. I lay there, wide-eyed and trembling, until exhaustion finally claimed me. I woke early to the sound of shouts and commotion outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the world fresh but still shrouded in a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Stepping out of the motorhome, I immediately noticed deep, deliberate scratches etched into the body. My first thought was a wild animal, but the marks were too precise, too menacing. My pulse quickened as dread settled in my stomach. Roxanne ran up to me, panic etched on her face. She frantically explained that they had heard a terrible screeching noise during the night. Bob had gone out to investigate and never returned. My heart sank. I told the women to stay inside and locked the door while I searched for Bob. I ventured into the dense forest, calling out for Bob. My voice echoed eerily among the trees, but there was no response. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, set my nerves on edge. Hours passed with no sign of Bob, and as the day wore on, my desperation grew. As darkness began to fall, I heard the women's screams coming from the campsite. I ran back, heart racing, my mind conjuring all sorts of terrible scenarios. What I saw was worse than any nightmare. A figure with burnt, peeling skin was hammering on the motorhome with a large stone, while Roxanne and Emily screamed in terror inside. I froze, fear gripping me, but managed to shout, "Hey, what do you want?" The figure stopped and turned to look at me. Its face was a grotesque mask of horror. It charged at me, and I barely managed to dodge. I sprinted to the motorhome, the women opening the door just in time for me to dive inside. The burnt figure let out a blood-curdling scream, but I started the engine and drove off, wheels spinning in the mud. In the rearview mirror, I watched in horror as the creature savagely attacked a second motorhome. We had barely escaped with our lives. The terror in Emily's eyes mirrored my own. We drove for hours, trying to put as much distance between us and that nightmare as possible. Finally, we stopped in a small, deserted parking lot off a dirt road, too exhausted to continue. That night, we huddled together, too afraid to sleep. Every creak of the motorhome made us jump. As dawn broke, we decided to head to the nearest town and contact the authorities. The police listened to our story with a mix of skepticism and concern. They promised to search for Bob and the creature, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. We were told to stay in town until further notice. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the memory of that figure and the knowledge that Bob was still out there somewhere. The following days were a blur of police interviews and restless waiting. Search parties scoured the forest but found no trace of Bob or the creature. The second motorhome was completely burned down, a twisted, charred wreck. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of horror through me. Roxanne was inconsolable, and my wife and I did our best to support her, though we were barely holding it together ourselves. The police eventually called off the search, officially declaring Bob missing. They had no explanation for the creature we described, no leads to follow. We returned home, but our lives were forever changed. The memory of that bird figure haunted me, a constant reminder of the terror we have faced. I may never know the answers, but one thing is certain. I will never return to that place. The peace and beauty of nature now hold a sinister undertone, a reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the shadows.